Madam Deputy Chairman, this bill that we have been discussing arises under very peculiar circumstances. And there are two facets of this entire debate which I wish to emphasize upon. The first, of course, is a matter which has been a concern in this House as also in the entire polity and other institutions of this country, how to really exonerate Indian politics from the influence of any form of criminalization. It's a legitimate concern, and to some measure the bill seeks to address that problem. I shall deal with it a little later. But the other aspect is in relation to the circumstances under which this bill really has been introduced. And that aspect relates to the authority and jurisdiction of Indian Parliament to legislate. I say this with a sense of deep concern that over the last few years, gradually, what we had envisaged as one of the basic facets of our Constitution, the separation of powers, where the legislative jurisdiction vests exclusively in Parliament, has been increasingly getting obliterated and getting substituted by what is known as judicial legislation. Through a process of judicial legislation, an encroachment has been increasingly made in the Parliament's jurisdiction to legislate. And perhaps one glaring example where such a situation has arisen is in relation to the circumstances under which this bill really has been enacted. Madam, the Constitution of India under Article 327 very clearly provides that in relation to elections and conduct of elections, it shall be the Parliament of India, that is both houses of this Parliament, which shall legislate in relation to all laws in relation to the conduct of elections. Pursuant to that, we have enacted the Representations of People Act 1950 and 1951. In the 1951 Act, in section 36, we have clearly provided what are going to be the conditions of a valid nomination paper. Those conditions for a valid nomination which deal with scrutiny of nominations and when the nominations can be rejected are mentioned in the legislation which this august House along with the other House has framed and which has stood the test of time. If there is a need to add upon further conditions of a valid nomination paper, it is this Parliament, it is this House and the other House alone and no other institution, however constitutional or august those institutions would be, who really have a jurisdiction to interfere in that process of enactment. Unfortunately, we faced a judgment of the Delhi High Court, which amongst other factors mentioned that there would be a requirement that every candidate to an election would be required to file an affidavit. And along with that affidavit, the candidate would be expected to give details of several facts in relation to the candidate. I must submit that the Election Commission of India at this stage had opposed this direction which was made by the Delhi High Court. They contested this direction, they did not agree with this direction. The details which were asked for were in relation to offences which a candidate is accused of, assets possessed by a candidate or his spouse. The third is most important: facts giving insight into the candidate's competence, capacity and suitability for acting as a parliamentarian. Now this matter, which is to be decided by the ultimate sovereign, which is the people of India, somehow got substituted, and therefore to the returning officer you have to explain why you consider yourself competent to become a parliamentarian or a legislator. And the fourth is information which the Election Commission considers necessary for judging the capacity and the capability of a political party fielding the candidate to an election to Parliament or the state legislature. Now it is the Election Commission whose only jurisdiction is to make sure that there is a conduct of free and fair election, will now become some kind of a ombudsman or a monitor and start determining what kind of capacity and capability a political party has. It's a matter which is to be judged in a democracy by the people of India, not by the Election Commission or its members, and this direction was issued. Election Commission at this stage was still opposed to these directions. In fact, when the Government of India questioned this direction before the Supreme Court, the Election Commission, even at that stage, had been opposed to some of these directives which had been issued. I was just now perusing the affidavit which the Election Commission had filed. The Election Commission, in fact, had gone to the extent of saying that some of these directions would result in a situation which would be destructive of the very democratic institution itself. We then had a change of personnel as far as the Election Commission was concerned. The stand was changed. And finally, the Supreme Court, in this judgment, has given a direction in which the Supreme Court says that there are 5 details which a candidate now has to present. Now, what is extremely interesting when I speak in terms of encroachment of jurisdiction of Parliament, the Supreme Court laid down guidelines that now it is necessary, in addition to what is stated in section 36, that is conditions of a valid nomination paper, there are judicial directions in addition to what Parliament decides as to what a candidate must disclose. I can understand some of those directions may be very well-meaning, but then it is for this Parliament to decide that those well-meaning suggestions have to be incorporated in the law. The jurisdiction which is vested in Parliament through this process cannot be taken away by the Supreme Court under any jurisdiction, because the legislative jurisdiction vests alone in Parliament. And the directions were, and I deal with each of the 5 directions, whether the candidate is convicted, acquitted, discharged of any criminal offence in the past. If any, whether he is punished with imprisonment or fine. So whether you have been convicted, whether you have been discharged, whether you are a trade union activist, whether you are a political activist, you quoted arrest under section 144, you must have all those details, and if you forget to mention any of those details, the consequences will then arise. Convicted or acquitted or discharged. Now, during the process before this ordinance came into effect, 2 or 3 by-elections were held after this judgment, and for those 2 or 3 by-elections, this judgment was in force. Out of my own curiosity and education, I tried to bring about and see what candidates to those by-elections really had to say about these details. Mr. Narayana Tiwari contested the by-election in Uttaranchal. So in his nomination paper, which I had an occasion, which was shown in some other institution, he says, I remember that I was jailed in 1942. The section, the court, the dates, the acquittal, the discharge, the judgment are all not with me. Now this would be true in almost relation to people in different political activity, to give details of every case where you have been discharged, and there is no distinction as to which case you have been convicted, in which case you have been discharged, whether it is a case of a political agitation. Madam, I do recollect, if I speak from a personal experience, I had 7 prosecutions against me during the emergency. If I am asked to fill up a nomination in consonance with this judgment, I am sure the nomination would be liable to be rejected. I don't remember the details of a single one of them. The second was, prior to 6 months, if there is any case pending, that's related to the first one, assets of a candidate and his or her spouse and that of dependents. Now the candidate having to give his assets, I can understand that if you want probity in public life, that people who get elected must disclose their assets, ministers disclose their assets to the Prime Minister. There are several legislators which have made a rule that there must be declaration of assets after you have been elected. So after getting elected, if there is an increment in the assets itself, the people are entitled to know. But in this case, before you get elected, merely because you file a nomination, you must make your assets public. And even though the present law has a provision for a subsequent declaration of assets, we must always bear in mind that when assets are declared, the experience has been that those with declared assets declare their assets. Those with undeclared assets don't declare their assets. So the honest man's assets always become public, and the person who falls in the other category, his assets always remain a secret because they are the non-declared assets. But this has been one of the demands which has been raised for the last few decades. Therefore, this issue has continued. Liabilities, if any, particularly whether there are dues of any public financial institution or government dues. Now, there could be a dispute, there could be a telephone bill pending, there could be an electricity bill pending, there could be some appeals of the income tax which are pending. How are each one of them relevant to his right to contest election and the voters' right to elect him? What are the consequences of this? And I'll show subsequently what the Election Commission did. Because when they realized that the parliament's jurisdiction was being taken over by the Supreme Court, the Election Commission decided that let me chip a little more of it and take some of it myself. Because the Election Commission also indulged in a parallel legislation. And the effect of this was that if I were to file my nomination and say, well, a bank has a claim of 50 lakhs against me, my opponent could well file an objection and say, well, with interest, this is not 50 lakhs, this is 80 lakhs. And a returning officer within 1 day available to him would become the adjudicatory authority of my educational qualifications, my assets, my bank claims against me, my dues and bills which are pending. And once the nomination is rejected, even if it's wrongfully rejected, then the remedy under Article 329 would only be to file an election petition. Let us recollect that in a recent election held in one of our neighboring countries, a provision of this kind was introduced, which newspapers have said and responsible international magazines have said, which was used to subvert democracy in that country. A qualification requirement was put in. And under that qualification requirement, one leading politician, also a former cricketer, found his nomination on the same qualification rejected by one returning officer, accepted by another. People were expected to be candidates. People who were expected to be graduates brought certificates from madrasas. So the returning officer rejected some certificates and accepted some certificates. And there has been a great debate in that country that that law of having graduates only can contest was actually one of the principal weapons used to subvert democracy or subvert the process of elections in that country. And lastly, of course, was in relation to election commission, the educational qualifications. Now, not being satisfied with this direction, what is very curious is the election commission, after the change of personnel, asked the Supreme Court, make these 5 directions and give us the power to our returning officers to decide whether correct details are given or incorrect details are given. So if incorrect details are given, we should have the power to reject the nomination papers. They filed an affidavit seeking that power. The Supreme Court did not give them this power. Why I say this relates to Parliament's jurisdiction, that even when Supreme Court did not give them this power, the Election Commission, but for this ordinance, decided to give that power to itself. And pursuant to Article 324, the Election Commission passed a directive on 28th of June 2002, and in that direction they said every candidate must file his nomination paper. Non-furnishing of the affidavit shall be considered to be a violation of this order. And lastly, furnishing of any wrong or incomplete information or suppression of any material information by a candidate or from the said affidavit may also result in rejection of the nomination paper. So if this ordinance had not been brought, and if this ordinance doesn't become an act which has the effect of nullifying some parts of the judgment and this order of the Election Commission, the situation will retrieve, that the judgment revives, the order of the Election Commission revives, as a result of which returning officers, ADMs, SDMs, collectors who are returning officers, in that 14-day period when the nominations are to be filed, and in that 1 or 2 day period for scrutiny of nominations, will first become ombudsmen of assets of candidates, whether somebody has correctly declared his jewelry or not correctly declared his wife's jewelry, become ombudsmen of whether bank loans and electricity dues have been correctly declared or not, and whether educational qualifications have been correctly mentioned or not. In fact, the other by-election which was held was under which Dr. P.C. Alexander got elected to the Rajya Sabha. So when his nomination was shown, I checked, I also had a chance to see it. One was Mr. Narendra Tiwari's, one was Dr. P.C. Alexander's when the judgment was enforced. So Mr. Narendra Tiwari never remembered which judge had convicted him in 1942, how many days he spent, what was the section under which he was convicted. So a convenient, pliable returning officer could legitimately have rejected the nomination. Dr. Alexander knew his entire qualifications he mentioned, but in that thick affidavit which he was required to file, his school and college passing out details, his post-graduation and PhD were all mentioned, but even a person as eminent as him had not filled up some of those details. So any returning officer could rise up and say, well, this is not required to be filed. And this has not been correctly filed, and therefore the nomination can be rejected on this ground. Madam, I raise this question for the reason. The issue of probity in public life has to be independently considered. The first issue which this House must be concerned with is the effect of this law is to substantially set aside the effect of the judgment and the effect of the order of the Election Commission. Besides being impractical in many manners, both the judgment and the order of the Election Commission have taken away the legislative jurisdiction of Parliament and decided that now part of the legislative jurisdiction goes to Supreme Court by this judicial legislation power, and part of the legislative jurisdiction gets further added on to the authority of the Election Commission by saying, well, now I will have the power to decide all this. What in effect takes place? Section 36 of the Representation of People's Act may give 4 or 5 reasons when a nomination can be rejected. Read jointly the effect of the Supreme Court judgment and the Election Commission order. They have added 5 more reasons why a nomination can be rejected. And some of those reasons give absolutely arbitrary power, which, as I have said on basis of the instances and experience of one of our neighboring countries, could be effectively used in a given situation to subvert the very institution of elections. We have seen that happening in the other country, our neighboring country, and this is something which we must be very careful of. And one of the first reasons I believe that this legislation must be passed is that this encroachment of parliamentary jurisdiction by any other authority, howsoever high they may be, has to come to an end. This cannot be permitted to continue. If it does continue, it brings about an imbalance in the entire functioning of our democracy, where separation of powers between the legislature and the judiciary is a part of our basic structure as in an inherent component of our democracy. Secondly, madam, as far as the main issue is concerned, the concern really has been on issues of criminals entering public life. How do we stop that? That's an issue which Parliament has to now consider how to address. We've had several all-party meetings. There have been suggestions of the Law Commission, there have been suggestions of the Election Commission that the framing of the charge should be considered as sufficient to prevent a person from contesting elections. And whenever all-party meetings have been held, except for one party from the state of Sikkim, almost every national party was opposed to this suggestion, not because they wanted to encourage criminals to enter politics. Because one reality every political party was aware of, law and order is a state subject. The power to prosecute is best with the local police. It's a power with every sub-inspector of this country. And once you record 2 statements and file a prosecution, then a situation may well come. The moment a charge is framed, a charge could be framed for gherauing the management in a trade union movement, a charge could be framed for being in agitational politics, a charge could be framed for being in legitimate criminal activity, in illegitimate criminal activity also. Now, under all these circumstances, who will make this distinction? So the political parties felt that the final arbiter of this really has to be the people of India. And therefore, if it has to be the people of India, they must know who they are electing, who they are not electing. You need people education. You don't need to create bars and give jurisdictions, because if you give the power to stop a person from contesting an elections, then let me give a realistic example. Let us take a situation when our first elections were held, almost every leader of our freedom movement had criminal cases against them. Let us look back at the 1977 election. There was hardly a member of Mr. Morarji Desai's cabinet who didn't have some form of prosecution against him or the other filed during the emergency. All you had to do was to file prosecutions of this kind, get the charges framed, and then say, well, the bar on you comes. And therefore, the present legislation which has been brought about by the Department of Law is well considered. It balances the situation. It gives the people the right to know what are the serious criminal cases against a person on basis of his affidavit. And thereafter, after he gets elected, it gives the people the right to know what his assets are. There is some nexus between his assets, increase in assets, with any possible misuse of authority. The nexus should not be for what he has possessed before he ever became a candidate. The nexus has to be that once in office, you have not misused your office to collect further or increase your further assets, and therefore the legislation in this regard is a balanced piece of legislation which has been brought. And I would urge this Honorable House to consider this fact And therefore also the fact that this house has to assert its jurisdiction and authority to legislate, which is being gradually taken away. It is with these words, madam, that I support this bill which has been brought about by the Ministry of Law. Thank you.